China is calling for calm in negotiations in the Ukraine. Hundreds of thousands of demonstrators have protested over the government backing away from possible membership in the European Union. Instead, President Viktor Yanukovych wants closer ties with Moscow. Still, thousands have demonstrated in support of the move. CCTV's Richard Bestic reports from Kiev.
Night has fallen on Independence Square in the Ukraine capital, and the standoff continues around the presidential palace, as you can probably hear behind me. The protesters have already established something of a routine. Speeches and music calling for the resignation of the government and President Viktor Yanukovych. The numbers are down on the weekend, when some suggested more than 250,000 people are on the streets. The riot police are reacting in what NATO foreign ministers have called an excessive manner. It's estimated some 100 were injured. While it may now be quiet, or at least relatively quiet here internationally, there's a flurry of activity. Yanukovych is in China negotiating loans for the teetering Ukraine economy. A delegation has been sent to Moscow negotiating gas prices as the bitter Ukraine winter sets in. And another delegation has been dispatched to Brussels for talks on EU integration. That the Ukraine turns to both the EU and Moscow at a time of crisis is perhaps the essence of this conflict, a country divided by its loyalties and under pressure from two powerful neighbours. Richard Bestic, CCTV, in the Independence Square, Kiev, Ukraine.
Richard mentioned President Yanukovych's visit to China. We're learning more about that visit. He arrived in the western city of Xi'an early Wednesday morning. The three-day visit had been previously planned to establish new economic agreements. Beijing is widely reported to be seeking access to Ukraine's agricultural industry as a source for food. Three former Ukrainian presidents say they support the demonstrations, and looking deeper into the issues, experts say there's a real division among people living in the country. I asked a specialist at IHS Global Insight to take us inside the issue. Lilit Gevorgyan gave us her insight.
Well, you rightly mentioned that traditionally Ukraine has been divided along the linguistic lines. I wouldn't say really cultural lines. Of course, there is a large Russian population in eastern Ukrainian regions, and there are many Ukrainians whose first language is Russian. So there has been this linguistic and cultural affiliation with Russia, particularly in eastern Ukrainian regions. At the same time, in the western Ukraine, you've had sort of more traditional Ukrainian, in some cases also nationalistic movements. This divide was apparent during the Orange Revolution, when it was effectively the Western Ukrainians who were leading the movement, and that ended up actually souring relations with Russia. So there hasn't really been a lot of effort put into persuading the Eastern Ukrainians that EU is the long-term best choice.
You're talking about the Ukrainian goals. Let's talk about the potentially attractive asset to either the European Union or Russia, which Ukraine obviously is. A lot of mineral resources, an annual output of more than $300 billion, but it also has some financial burdens. It owes about $60 billion, or a third of the country's GDP, in debt. So here's the question, from an economic perspective, how much power does Ukraine have?
I think the Ukrainian economies in Ukraine's as a country, the economic potential is quite large, and I think one of the misfortunes of the country has been the fact that due to macroeconomic policy failures in the past decade, I'd say, this potential has not been explored properly. Ukraine is one of the largest European countries. It has 46 million population, well-educated population, and it has mineral resources as well. Then it has legacy infrastructure from Soviet Union that has been modernized. So the potential is there. However, it hasn't been explored yet. Unfortunately, because because the process has reached a point where it's either or for Ukraine. It seems like the choices is a bit zero sum. Either Ukraine is with European Union and against Russia, or the other way around. The way forward for Ukraine could be going back to do their homework, so to speak, on the macroeconomic side, take painful decisions, for example, liberalizing gas prices, unlocking the cooperation with IMF, partially devaluating their currency. So once they are in better shape, then they will be in a position to make foreign policy choices. However, there's another problem, and that is that the current president is very keen to get re-elected in early 2015 elections. And of course, all the painful reforms that I mentioned earlier will be very unpopular, hence his reluctance to go for them.
Lilit Gevorgyan, thank you so much for your analysis. Appreciate it.
Thank you.